23rd August, 1942. Stalingrad, Soviet Union. The sky turned black at 4 in the afternoon, not from storm clouds, but from smoke. Thick, choking columns of it rose from 1,000 fires as the Luftwaffe unleashed hell upon Stalingrad. Junkers U-87 Stukas screamed down in tight spirals, their sirens wailing like banshees, dropping payloads that turned entire neighborhoods into craters. Below, 500,000 civilians had nowhere to run. Wooden houses exploded into kindling. The Barricady gun factory, Red October steel plant, Dzerzhinsky tractor works, industrial symbols of Soviet might, became infernos. By nightfall, over 40,000 people were dead. This was the beginning of Hitler's most ambitious gamble in the East, a battle that would consume his Sixth Army and mark the high watermark of Nazi expansion. 2 years and 4 months later, on a frozen December morning in 1944, that same war machine, battered, desperate, but still dangerous, would make one final catastrophic lunge westward through the snow-covered forests of Belgium. The Ardennes, the Battle of the Bulge, Hitler's last roll of the dice. 2 battles, separated by time and geography, yet connected by a single thread. The rise and inevitable fall of the Wehrmacht from the heights of Stalingrad to the depths of the Ardennes forest. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from the Second World War. Where are you watching from? And if you had been a soldier in either of these battles, which would you have feared more? The frozen ruins of Stalingrad or the dark forests of the Ardennes? To understand how Hitler's war machine rose to such terrifying heights and then collapsed so completely, we must examine these 2 battles side by side. Stalingrad in 1942 represented Nazi Germany at its most powerful, confident, aggressive, pushing deep into enemy territory with seemingly unstoppable momentum. The Battle of the Bulge in 1944 represented Germany in its death throes, a cornered beast lashing out with desperate fury, knowing that defeat was inevitable but refusing to accept it. Together, these battles tell the story of hubris, determination, sacrifice, and the terrible arithmetic of industrial warfare. The contrast is stark. In Stalingrad, the Wehrmacht was on the offensive, driving toward the oil fields of the Caucasus, believing that one more victory would break Soviet resistance forever. In the Bulge, the Wehrmacht was defending the Reich itself, launching a surprise offensive, not to win the war, but merely to delay the inevitable, to buy time, to split the Allies, and perhaps negotiate a favorable peace. At Stalingrad, German soldiers fought in summer uniforms under a brutal sun before winter froze them in place. In the Bulge, they fought in winter gear through blinding snowstorms, their tanks running on fumes, their supply lines collapsing behind them. Yet both battles share common themes: encirclement and counterattack, brutal weather conditions, desperate last stands, and the gradual realization among German commanders that they were fighting a war they could no longer win. Let us begin where Hitler's fortunes were still rising, in the burning streets of Stalingrad. By the summer of 1942, Nazi Germany controlled most of continental Europe, from the Atlantic coast of France to the gates of Moscow, from Norway to North Africa. The swastika flew over conquered territories, but the Soviet Union remained unbroken. The failure to capture Moscow in 1941 had been a shock, but Hitler convinced himself and his generals that one more offensive, properly executed, would shatter Soviet resistance. Operation Blau, Case Blue, was launched on 28 June 1942. The objective was the Caucasus oil fields near Baku, which produced 70% of Soviet petroleum. Army Group South, the most powerful German formation in the east, smashed through Soviet defenses and raced across the southern Russian steppes. Towns fell rapidly. Panzer divisions encircled entire Soviet armies. By late July, German forces reached the Don River. Victory seemed within grasp. But Hitler, never content with half measures, made a fateful decision. He split.
The battle for Mamayev-Kurgan, a hill in the city center, changed hands multiple times. The soil became so saturated with metal fragments that compasses wouldn't work. Soviet soldiers crossed the Volga every night under artillery fire, reinforcing Choikov's battered army. The average life expectancy of a newly arrived Soviet soldier was 24 hours. Yet they held. Week after week, they held. One location became legendary: Pavlov's house, a 4-story apartment building defended by Sergeant Yakov Pavlov and fewer than 30 men. For 58 days, they held off repeated German assaults. Tanks fired point-blank into the walls. Stukas dropped bombs. The building was reduced to a skeleton, but Pavlov's men refused to surrender. Choikov later remarked, with some exaggeration, that the Germans lost more men taking Pavlov's house than they did taking Paris. By October, the battle shifted to Stalingrad's factory district, the Barikady gun factory, Red October steel plant, and Dzerzhinsky tractor works. These massive industrial complexes became 3-dimensional fortresses. Workers fought alongside soldiers, blast furnaces provided cover, assembly lines became trenches. The Germans threw everything they had at the factories, grinding entire divisions down to company strength. The 24th Panzer Division, once 15,000 strong, was reduced to a few dozen operational tanks. Paulus believed one more push would break Soviet resistance. He was wrong. While he fixated on taking the city, Marshal Georgy Zhukov was planning a massive counteroffensive, Operation Uranus. On 19 November 1942, Soviet forces attacked the flanks of Army Group B, held by poorly equipped Romanian divisions. The Romanian lines collapsed within hours. Soviet tank columns raced westward. On 22 November, the two pincers met west of Stalingrad. The Sixth Army, over 250,000 men, was encircled. Paulus requested permission to break out. Hitler refused. Stalingrad would be held. Hermann Göring promised to supply the pocket by air, 500 tons per day. It was a fantasy. The Luftwaffe never delivered more than a fraction of that amount. Winter came. Temperatures dropped to -40 degrees Celsius. German soldiers, in summer uniforms, froze to death at their posts. Horses were slaughtered for food. Medical supplies vanished. Starvation became routine. On 10 January 1943, the Red Army launched the final assault, Operation Ring. The pocket shrank daily. On 31 January, Paulus surrendered. The northern pocket held out until 2 February. Of 250,000 encircled men, only 90,000 survived to become prisoners. Of those, fewer than 6,000 would ever see Germany again. The Sixth Army ceased to exist. Stalingrad marked the turning point of the war in the East. The Wehrmacht would never again mount a successful strategic offensive against the Soviet Union. The Long Retreat, 1943 to 1944. The 2 years between Stalingrad and the Battle of the Bulge were years of relentless German retreat. The Red Army pushed westward, driving the Wehrmacht out of Ukraine, Belarus, and Poland. In July 1943, Germany's last major offensive in the east, Operation Citadel at Kursk, ended in catastrophic failure. The largest tank battle in history consumed over 6,000 armored vehicles and ended German offensive capability forever. From Kursk onward, Germany was on the defensive. Meanwhile, the Western Allies tightened their grip. In July 1943, they invaded Sicily. In September, they landed in mainland Italy. Mussolini's regime collapsed. In June 1944, Operation Overlord, the D-Day invasion of Normandy, opened a second front. Over 150,000 Allied troops stormed the beaches on 6 June. By August, Paris was liberated. By September, Allied armies were approaching Germany's western border. Hitler's Reich was collapsing. German cities burned under Allied bombing.
Dresden, Hamburg, Berlin. The Bulge, Hitler's last gamble. 16th December, 1944, 5:30 a.m. The Ardennes Forest, Belgium. The forest exploded. Over 1,600 German artillery pieces opened fire simultaneously along an 80-mile front, shattering the pre-dawn silence. American soldiers, holding thinly stretched defensive positions in what they believed was a quiet sector, were caught completely by surprise. Shells rained down on foxholes, command posts, and supply depots. Within minutes, communications were severed, units isolated, chaos spreading like wildfire. Then came the tanks. Out of the morning fog and snow rolled 3 German armies, the 6th SS Panzer Army in the north, 5th Panzer Army in the center, 7th Army in the south. Over 200,000 men, 1,400 armored vehicles, including fearsome Tiger II tanks and Panthers, supported by what remained of the Luftwaffe. It was Germany's last operational reserve, scraped together from every available source. Veteran divisions pulled from the Eastern Front, newly formed Volksgrenadier units filled with old men and teenagers, SS fanatics loyal to Hitler until death. The attack achieved complete surprise. American intelligence had dismissed warnings of a German buildup, believing the Wehrmacht as too weak to mount a major offensive. The Ardennes sector was held by inexperienced divisions resting after heavy combat and by green units newly arrived from the States. They were overrun. Entire regiments were surrounded. Panic spread. German panzer columns drove deep into American lines, creating a bulge in the Allied front, hence the battle's name. Leading the 5th Panzer Army's spearhead was SS Obersturmbannführer Joachim Peiper, commanding Kampfgruppe Peiper, a battle group of tanks, half-tracks, and infantry. Peiper was a veteran of the Eastern Front, ruthless and aggressive. His mission? Race to the Meuse River, seizing bridges before American reinforcements could arrive. On the first day, Kampfgruppe Peiper advanced over 20 miles, bypassing resistance, leaving destruction in its wake. On 17th December, Peiper's men committed one of the war's worst atrocities, the Malmedy Massacre. At a crossroads near Malmedy, they captured over 80 American prisoners, mostly artillerymen from Battery B of the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion. The Americans were disarmed and herded into a field. Then, without warning, German machine guns opened fire. 84 Americans were murdered in cold blood. Some pretended to be dead, lying motionless as SS soldiers walked among the bodies, shooting survivors. A handful escaped to tell the tale. News of the massacre spread rapidly, hardening American resolve. Quarter would not be asked nor given. The weather favored the Germans. Thick fog and snow grounded Allied aircraft, negating the Allies' overwhelming air superiority. German columns pushed forward, seizing villages, overrunning supply depots, spreading confusion. American troops fell back in disorder, but they did not break. Small units held key crossroads and villages, delaying German advances, buying precious time. At the town of St. Vith, the 7th Armored Division and elements of the 106th Infantry Division held out for 6 days against overwhelming odds, tying down German forces desperately needed for the drive to the Meuse. When St. Vith finally fell on 21st December, it had delayed the German offensive by nearly a week, time the Allies used to rush reinforcements to the front. But the most crucial stand occurred at Bastogne, a small Belgian town sitting at the intersection of 7 major roads. Control of Bastogne was essential. Whoever held it controlled movement through the Ardennes. The 101st Airborne Division, rushed north from reserve positions, reached Bastogne on 19th December, just hours before German forces surrounded the town. Alongside them was Combat Command B of the 10th Armored Division and remnants of other units. In total, about 18,000 men, outnumbered and surrounded by over 45,000 Germans. The German commander sent an ultimatum: surrender or be annihilated. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, acting commander of the 101st, responded with a single word: nuts. The Germans, confused by American slang, asked for clarification. The reply was explicit: "Go to hell." The siege of Bastogne began. German artillery pounded the town. Infantry and tanks attacked repeatedly. American defenders, short on ammunition and medical supplies, held every position. Wounded men shivered in makeshift aid stations. Food ran out. Temperatures dropped below freezing, yet they held. On 23 December, the weather cleared. Allied aircraft filled the sky, dropping supplies to the surrounded garrison and bombing German positions. The tide was turning.
Patton's relief and the German collapse. While Bastogne held, General George S. Patton executed one of the war's most remarkable maneuvers. His Third Army, engaged in operations to the south, disengaged, pivoted 90 degrees north, and drove toward Bastogne through blizzard conditions, a logistical miracle involving over 250,000 men and thousands of vehicles moving in coordinated precision. On 26 December, elements of Patton's 4th Armored Division broke through German lines and reached Bastogne. The siege was lifted. McAuliffe's men had held. By late December, the German offensive was collapsing. Fuel shortages crippled panzer columns. Kampfgruppe Piper, having advanced farther than any other German unit, ran out of gasoline near Staumund. Surrounded and out of options, Piper abandoned his vehicles and led his men on foot back to German mines through freezing forests, leaving behind over 100 tanks and vehicles. The weather cleared permanently on 24 December, unleashing the full fury of Allied air power. Thousands of sorties pounded German positions. Supply convoys were destroyed. Roads became death traps. American reinforcements poured into the Ardennes, entire corps redeployed from quiet sectors. British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, commanding Allied forces north of the Bulge, organized a defensive line that stopped German advances cold. The Bulge in the Allied line reached its maximum extent on 25 December, about 60 miles deep and 40 miles wide. Then the Allied counteroffensive began. German units, exhausted and undersupplied, fought desperate rearguard actions. Hitler refused to authorize withdrawal, ordering his men to hold every position. They obeyed until they couldn't anymore. Villages changed hands multiple times. The Ardennes forest became a frozen graveyard. By mid-January 1945, Allied forces had pushed the Germans back to their starting positions. The Battle of the Bulge was over.
2 winters, 1 fate. The soldiers who fought at Stalingrad and the Bulge experienced similar horrors across different landscapes. German soldiers at Stalingrad froze in the ruins of Soviet apartment blocks, burning furniture for warmth, eating horses and worse. German soldiers in the Ardennes froze in Belgian forests, burning fence posts for warmth, abandoning tanks that had no fuel. Soviet soldiers at Stalingrad crossed the Volga under artillery fire, knowing they would likely die within hours. American soldiers at Bastogne endured German artillery bombardments in frozen foxholes, knowing relief might not come in time. Both battles showcased the terrible power of modern industrial warfare. At Stalingrad, Soviet factories beyond the Urals produced thousands of T-34 tanks, enough to replace losses and build reserves for the counteroffensive. In the Bulge, American factories produced an endless stream of Sherman tanks, trucks, ammunition, and aircraft. Germany, its industry bombed to rubble, could not compete. Both battles revealed the importance of air power. At Stalingrad, the Luftwaffe's failure to supply the encircled Sixth Army doomed it. In the Bulge, when weather cleared and Allied aircraft took to the skies, the German offensive was finished. Both battles demonstrated that logistics wins wars, not bravery, not tactics, but the ability to feed, fuel, and arm your troops. But perhaps the most important parallel is this. Both battles represented moments when Hitler's refusal to accept reality led directly to catastrophe. At Stalingrad, Paulus could have broken out in the first days after encirclement, saving much of his army. Hitler forbade it. At the Bulge, German commanders could have withdrawn when the offensive stalled, preserving forces to defend the Rhine. Hitler forbade it. His inability to admit defeat turned setbacks into disasters. But their sacrifices were not equal. Those who fought to defend freedom, to liberate occupied nations, to stop genocide, their sacrifices built the post-war world we live in today. Those who fought for Hitler's vision of racial supremacy and continental domination, their sacrifices served only to delay the inevitable defeat of evil. Stalingrad and the Bulge teach us that wars are not won by courage alone, nor by superior tactics, nor even by better weapons. Wars are won by nations with the industrial capacity to replace losses, the political will to endure hardship, and the moral clarity to know what they're fighting for. Nazi Germany had none of these. The Allies had all three. These two battles, separated by time, geography, and circumstance, remain forever linked as twin testaments to the rise and fall of Hitler's Reich. From the burning streets of Stalingrad to the frozen forests of the Ardennes, the arc of Nazi Germany bent inexorably toward defeat. The question was never if Germany would lose, but how much destruction would occur before it did. But while Europe burned, another theater of war was reaching its own terrible climax, the Pacific, where American forces island-hopped toward Japan, fighting enemies who preferred death to surrender. Join us next time as we storm the beaches of Iwo Jima and witness one of the bloodiest battles in Marine Corps history. Until then, remember those who fought in the frozen hell of Stalingrad and the dark forests of Belgium, and never forget the price of freedom.